He stood on the rain-slicked pavement with exactly $4 to his name and a frayed canvas bag his brother had laughingly called trash. 24 hours ago, he was the heir to a Chicago logistics empire. Tonight, he was completely homeless. But inside that battered, foul-smelling duffel lay a forgotten secret worth $50 million. The mahogany-paneled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Gable & Associates law firm felt more like a tomb than an office. The sprawling skyline of Chicago wept with heavy rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long grey shadows over the polished table. Noah Gallagher sat in a high-backed leather chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, staring blankly at the gold-embossed folder resting in front of the family attorney Richard Gable. Noah's father, William Gallagher, had built Gallagher Freight and Logistics into a billion-dollar juggernaut. William was a man forged in steel and diesel fumes, a ruthless titan who valued profit margins above human collateral. His sudden fatal heart attack at the age of 62 had sent shock waves through the corporate world. But for Noah, the shock was far more personal. He had spent his entire life trying to earn a sliver of affection from a man whose heart was a ledger of debts and assets. Across the table sat Preston, Noah's older brother by 4 years. Preston was the mirror image of their late father, sharp-featured, perpetually sneering and impeccably dressed in a bespoke Italian suit. Beside Preston sat Sylvia, their father's third wife, a woman who wore her widow's black like a tailored victory gown. Her eyes, cold and assessing, flicked toward Noah with thinly veiled contempt. Richard Gable cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. "If we are all ready, we shall proceed with the final will and testament of William Joseph Gallagher." Noah nodded silently. Preston checked his Rolex, sighing loudly. "Let's get on with it, Richard. The board is waiting for my final authorization on the Denver acquisition." The lawyer broke the wax seal. He read through the standard legal jargon, the minor charitable donations, and the liquidation of minor assets. Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. "To my eldest son, Preston." Richard read his voice, dropping half an octave. "I leave the entirety of my controlling shares in Gallagher Freight and Logistics, the estate on Astor Street, the ski lodge in Aspen, and all offshore holdings. You have my ruthlessness, Preston. Keep the empire growing." Preston smiled, leaning back and steepling his fingers. Sylvia patted his arm in a rare display of maternal solidarity, though she was only 10 years his senior. "To my wife, Sylvia, I leave the trust accounts as previously outlined in our prenuptial agreement, along with the summer house in the Hamptons." Richard paused, swallowing hard. His eyes flicked nervously toward Noah before returning to the thick parchment. "And to my youngest son, Noah." The lawyer continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Noah, your insistence on building employee welfare programs, your constant whining about carbon footprints, and your refusal to lay off the Detroit division when margins fell have proven you fundamentally unfit for business. You are soft. You have none of my blood in your veins. Therefore, I leave you nothing of monetary value. Your trust is hereby dissolved. Your bank accounts tied to the company are frozen. You are to vacate the Astor Street premises immediately." The words hit Noah like physical blows to the chest. He stopped breathing. "Nothing," Noah whispered. "He left me nothing. I worked 80-hour weeks for him for 10 years. "There is a final addendum, Noah," Richard said gently. "The will states Noah shall take only the clothes on his back and one single item of his choosing from the basement storage room of the Astor Street house to remind him of the dirt from which this family rose. He is to be escorted off the property by security by midnight tonight." Preston let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Well, isn't that poetic?" The old man had a sense of humor right to the bitter end. "This has to be illegal," Noah said, his voice rising in panic. The Detroit accounts I built, those I brought in 30% of last quarter's revenue. You were an employee." "Noah," Preston sneered, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "An employee who has just been terminated. The security team is already waiting for you at the house. Don't try to steal the silverware on your way out." 2 hours later, Noah stood in the cavernous, dimly lit basement of the Astor Street mansion. The air smelled of damp earth and old cedar. 2 massive private security guards hired by Preston stood at the top of the stairs, their arms crossed. They had already confiscated Noah's phone, his wallet, and his car keys. Even the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, a graduation gift from his mother before she passed away, had been stripped from him, claimed by Preston as company property, purchased with company funds. Noah was shattered. His chest ached with a hollow, burning betrayal. He walked slowly past crates of imported wine and antique furniture, looking for his one permitted item. He could take a painting, perhaps, or a silver tea set to pawn, but as he reached the dusty back corner, his eyes landed on something entirely out of place among the luxury. It was an old olive-green canvas duffel bag, heavily stained with motor oil and frayed at the edges. Noah knew this bag. It belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Gallagher, the man who started the company with a single rusty tow truck in 1955. Arthur had been a kind, calloused man who smelled of tobacco and peppermint. He used to tell Noah that true wealth wasn't in the bank, but in the hands and the mind. William had hated Arthur's humble roots and shoved all his belongings into this dark corner the day the old man died. Noah walked over and grabbed the thick canvas handles. The bag was surprisingly heavy, coated in 2 decades of dust. "Time's up," one of the guards barked from the stairs. "Preston wants you out. Now." Noah didn't look at the expensive antiques or the vintage wine. He slung the dirty, heavy canvas bag over his shoulder. He walked up the stairs past the smirking guards, past Preston, who stood in the marble foyer, sipping a glass of scotch. "A dirty tool bag," Preston laughed, shaking his head. "God, you really are a pathetic loser, Noah. Have a nice life on the streets." The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. The lock clicked. Noah stood on the cold stone steps as the Chicago rain began to pour, soaking through his thin dress shirt. He had no money, no phone, no family, and nowhere to go. He stepped off the porch and walked into the dark, relentless storm, clutching the useless canvas bag against his chest. The rain didn't let up. It drove down in freezing sheets, turning the city streets into slick, black mirrors, reflecting the harsh neon lights of Chicago's nightlife. Noah walked for 6 miles. Without his phone, he couldn't call the few friends he had, and even if he could, the humiliation choked him. Who would believe that a Gallagher was wandering the streets like a vagrant? His dress shoes meant for boardroom carpets blistered his heels. By 2 a.m. he found himself in Cicero, far from the glittering high-rises of downtown. He dug into the pockets of his slacks and found a crumpled $5 bill and a few coins. It was just enough to bribe the night manager of a decaying, roach-infested building called the Starlight Motel to let him sit in a vacant, uncleaned room for the rest of the night. The room smelled of stale cigarettes, mold, and desperation. The wallpaper was peeling in long, yellowed strips. Noah collapsed onto the edge of the sagging mattress, his wet clothes clinging to his shivering frame. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had spent a decade building his father's empire, sacrificing relationships, weekends, and his own youth only to be discarded like garbage. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a dry, broken sob. For hours he sat in the dark, listening to the rain batter the single cracked window. As dawn began to bleed through the cheap curtains, casting a sickly grey light across the room, Noah finally looked up. His eyes locked onto the olive-green canvas duffel bag sitting on the stained carpet. It was a pathetic sight, a relic of a bygone era. Noah slid off the bed and dropped to his knees in front of it. He unzipped the heavy brass zipper, the teeth protesting with a loud metallic grind. Inside it was exactly as he remembered from his childhood. There was a pair of cracked leather work gloves, stiff with age, a rusty set of heavy-duty wrenches, a dented thermos, and a tarnished brass compass. "Dirt," Noah whispered to himself, echoing his father's cruel will. Just dirt. He picked up a wrench. It was solid iron, incredibly heavy. He thought about pawning it. Maybe a scrap yard would give him $1 for the metal. He tossed it onto the bed. He pulled out the gloves, the thermos, the compass. But as he emptied the bag, Noah frowned. He placed his hands inside the empty canvas sack to shake out the dust. But the bottom didn't feel right. The bag was empty, yet it still weighed at least 5 pounds. Noah tapped his knuckles against the inside bottom. It didn't yield like canvas. It sounded dull and firm, like thick cardboard or thin wood. He flipped the bag over and examined the exterior. The stitching along the bottom seam was different from the rest of the bag. It was thick, heavy-duty marine thread, completely black, whereas the original stitching was olive drab. Someone had painstakingly sewn a false bottom into this duffel. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. A strange electric surge of adrenaline cut through his exhaustion. He reached over to the pile of tools on the bed, grabbing a small flathead screwdriver. With trembling hands, Noah jammed the sharp edge of the screwdriver under the thick, black thread. He sawed back and forth until the thread snapped. He pulled the seam apart, ripping the canvas back with a loud tear. A rectangular compartment was hidden beneath the canvas floor, perfectly hollowed out. Inside lay a bundle wrapped tightly in waterproof oilcloth and bound with a leather strap. Noah pulled the bundle out. It was the size of a large hardcover book. He undid the leather strap, his breath catching in his throat. He unfolded the stiff, waxy oilcloth. Inside rested 3 items. The first was a small, heavy brass key with a sequence of numbers stamped into the metal box, 742, Continental Trust. The second was a worn, leather-bound journal. The third was a thick stack of pristine, heavy-stock paper documents, sealed in a vacuum-tight archival sleeve. Noah opened the leather journal first. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his grandfather Arthur's neat, cursive script. The first page was dated October 14th, 1998, just a month before Arthur passed away. To whichever of my blood finds this, if you are reading this, William has likely shown his true colours. I watched my son grow into a monster of greed. I knew he would eventually cast aside anyone who didn't serve his bottom line, including his own kin. I built Gallagher Freight from the mud, but I never trusted William with the foundation. He thinks he owns the empire. He doesn't know I kept the ground it stands on. Noah's eyes widened. He scrambled to open the archival sleeve, pulling out the thick stack of documents. They were land deeds. But not just any deeds. They were the original unencumbered titles to the 3 massive parcels of industrial land in Chicago, Dallas, and New Jersey. These were the exact locations of Gallagher Freight's 3 largest and most profitable national distribution hubs. Noah read the fine print, his mind spinning. The land was owned by a holding company called Horizon Apex LLC. The next document in the stack was a set of untraceable bearer shares for Horizon Apex LLC. Whoever held these physical papers was the sole undisputed owner of the holding company, and thereby the owner of the land. William had never owned the land. He had just been leasing it from his dead father's shell corporation, likely assuming the holding company was a permanent fixture of the estate trust. Noah looked back at the journal and turned the page. William's 99-year lease on those properties expires in 30 days from the date of my death. I've hidden the bearer shares here. If William found this, he destroyed it. If you found this, Noah, you own the earth under his feet. The properties are valued at over $50 million, and the brass key that opens a vault in Zurich containing the dividends paid out over the last 20 years. Take it all back, my boy. Noah stared at the papers. His brother Preston didn't own the empire. Preston owned buildings that were sitting on Noah's land, and the lease was up. A slow, dangerous smile crept across Noah's face as the morning sun finally broke through the grey clouds, illuminating the peeling motel room. He was no longer a homeless, disinherited son. He was the landlord, and it was time to collect the rent. The rain had finally stopped by the time the banks opened in downtown Chicago. The morning sun glared off the glass skyscrapers, a stark contrast to the grim reality Noah had faced just hours prior. He still wore his damp, wrinkled suit, and he hadn't slept a wink, but his posture had fundamentally changed. The heavy canvas bag was strapped securely across his chest. Inside, it lay the instruments of his resurrection. Noah's first stop was not a lawyer's office, but the imposing marble facade of Continental Trust. He walked through the revolving brass doors, drawing suspicious glances from the uniformed security guards and the sharply dressed tellers. He looked like a man who had spent the night in a gutter, because he had. But when he approached the private wealth management desk and quietly placed the heavy brass key, marked Box 742 on the polished mahogany counter, the clerk's dismissive sneer vanished instantly. "Right away, sir," the clerk murmured, recognizing the vault tier reserved for the bank's most elite legacy clients. Down in the subterranean vault, surrounded by walls of brushed steel, Noah was left alone in a private viewing room. He inserted the brass key into the long metal box and lifted the lid. Inside lay a secondary ledger, a stack of international routing codes, and a velvet pouch containing $50,000 in emergency physical currency, crisp, untraceable $100 bills. Noah opened the ledger. His grandfather Arthur had been meticulous. For 20 years, Horizon Apex, LLC, had silently collected the massive lease payments from Gallagher Freight and Logistics. Because William Gallagher was arrogant enough to assume the holding company was a permanent, untouchable fixture of a defunct family trust, he never investigated where the money actually went. The funds had been automatically routed to a numbered account in Zurich, compounding interest for 2 decades. Noah pulled a sleek silver calculator from the bank's desk and typed in the final balance shown on the most recent automated bank statement. He stared at the digital display. $84 million. Liquid. Untraceable. And entirely his. Noah took $10,000 from the velvet pouch, locked the box, and left the bank. Within 3 hours he had transformed. He checked into the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, showered the smell of the Starlight Motel off his skin, and purchased a bespoke charcoal grey suit from a high-end tailor on the Magnificent Mile. When he looked in the mirror, the defeated, disinherited son was gone. In his place stood a man who wielded the power to dismantle an empire. At 2 p.m., Noah walked into the prestigious law offices of Harrison & Ford, a firm known for its ruthless, predatory corporate litigation. He bypassed the receptionist, placing a pristine $100 bill on her desk, and demanded to see Mitchell Harrison, the senior managing partner. Mitchell Harrison was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man whose reputation for destroying corporate giants was legendary. When Noah first sat in Mitchell's office and dropped the battered canvas bag on the glass desk, the lawyer looked amused. But as Noah unrolled the waxy oilcloth and laid out the bearer shares for Horizon Apex LL, Mitchell's amusement morphed into absolute rigid shock. "These are bearer shares," Mitchell whispered, putting on his reading glasses and examining the heavy watermark on the parchment. "Whoever holds these physical papers owns the company. No registry, no digital footprint. It's an antiquated system, mostly outlawed now, but these were issued before the legislative changes. They are fully grandfathered and entirely legal." and the company owns the land. Noah said, his voice cold and steady. The Chicago, Dallas, and New Jersey distribution hubs, the very heartbeat of Gallagher Freight. Mitchell rapidly pulled up the public property records on his computer. His eyes widened as he read the lease agreements. Noah, your father's 99-year lease on these properties expired at midnight last night, the exact moment he stipulated in his will for you to be thrown out on the street. It was a ticking time bomb, and William didn't even realize he was sitting on it. Preston is planning a massive acquisition in Denver tomorrow morning, Noah explained, leaning forward. He's bringing the board of directors together to authorize a $500 million bridge loan. He's going to use the 3 national hubs as collateral to secure that loan. Mitchell let out a low, predatory whistle. If he attempts to leverage land, he doesn't own land that is currently occupied by his company illegally. As the lease has expired, it constitutes massive, catastrophic corporate fraud. The SEC would dismantle him. The banks would freeze every asset Gallagher Freight has. I don't want to destroy the company, Noah said softly. I built the Detroit division. I care about the employees. I care about the legacy my grandfather started with that rusty tow truck. But Preston and Sylvia, I want them out. Completely. Mitchell smiled, a terrifying expression that promised absolute ruin. We don't just evict them, Noah. We squeeze them. As the legal owner of the land, you are entitled to instantly demand renegotiation of the lease. We will set the new rent at an astronomical figure, say $10 million a month per property. When Preston can't pay, and when his loan falls through because he lacks the collateral, Gallagher Freight's stock will plummet. He will be backed into a corner with zero liquidity. And then, Noah asked, and then you offer him a lifeline, Mitchell replied, tapping his gold pen against the bearer shares. You offer to forgive the lease violations and save the company from bankruptcy. But your price will be his controlling shares, all of them. Noah looked out the window of the law firm, watching the Chicago traffic far below. His father had told him he was soft. His brother had called him a pathetic loser. They were about to find out exactly what kind of dirt the Gallagher family was truly made of. Draft the papers, Mitchell, Noah said, his eyes reflecting the cold steel of the city. Tomorrow morning we crash the board meeting. The atmosphere in the boardroom of Gallagher Freight and Logistics was electric with victory. Preston Gallagher stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a smug smile plastered across his face as he projected the financial forecasts onto the massive screen. The Denver acquisition was going to solidify his reign and make him the undisputed king of Midwest logistics. Sylvia sat to his right, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet she had purchased that very morning to celebrate the reading of the will. The board members, 12 older men and women who cared only for their quarterly dividends, nodded in greedy approval as Preston outlined the final steps. The bridge loan of $500 million will be secured by our primary physical assets, the distribution hubs in Chicago, Dallas, and New Jersey. Preston announced smoothly, the bank has already pre-approved the collateral valuation. We just need the board's final signature, and the Denver fleet is ours. An aggressive move, Preston, said Gregory Donovan, a senior board member. But a brilliant one. Your father would be proud. My father knew how to trim the fat. Preston laughed, a cruel edge to his voice. Speaking of which, we've officially purged the dead weight from the executive suite. The Detroit welfare programs are being liquidated as we speak. Just as Gregory Donovan picked up his gold fountain pen to sign the board resolution, the heavy oak doors of the conference room burst open. The room fell dead silent. 2 private security guards rushed in, looking panicked. Mr. Gallagher, we tried to stop them, but they had a federal injunction. Stop who? Preston barked, his face flushing with anger. Footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor. Noah walked into the room, impeccably dressed in his charcoal suit, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Behind him walked Mitchell Harrison, carrying a sleek black leather briefcase. Preston's jaw dropped. He stared at his younger brother, entirely unable to reconcile the homeless, soaking wet vagrant he had thrown out yesterday with the Titan standing before him. Now. "Security!" Preston shouted, recovering his voice. "Get this pathetic trash out of my building!" "I wouldn't do that! Preston!" Noah said, his voice echoing through the cavernous room. He didn't raise his tone, but the sheer command in it froze the guards in their tracks. Mitchell Harrison stepped forward, slamming a thick stack of legal documents onto the mahogany table directly over the Denver acquisition contracts. Mitchell Harrison, representing Horizon Apex, LLC, the lawyer announced. "And I highly advise everyone in this room to put down their pens before you commit federal bank fraud." Murmurs erupted around the table. Gregory Donovan frowned, peering at Mitchell. Harrison, the corporate litigator. "What is the meaning of this?" "Noah." "The meaning? Gregory, is that my brother is attempting to secure a $500 million loan using assets he does not own," Noah said calmly, walking slowly around the table. Preston let out a harsh, desperate laugh. "Are you insane? Gallagher Freight owns those hubs. Dad owned them." "No, Preston. Dad leased them," Noah corrected, stopping directly behind Preston's chair, "from a holding company created by Grandpa Arthur. A 99-year lease. And do you know when that lease expired?" Noah leaned down, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Midnight. Last night." Mitchell Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a certified copy of the bearer shares, passing them to the board members. "As of midnight last night, Gallagher Freight and Logistics is trespassing on private property owned by my client, Mr. Noah Gallagher, the sole proprietor of Horizon Apex LLC." Sylvia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Preston snatched the document from Gregory Donovan's hands, his eyes darting frantically across the page, his face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen grey. "This is a forgery," Preston screamed, slamming his fists on the table. "Dad left me everything." "He left you the company?" Noah agreed smoothly. "But I own the ground it stands on. Furthermore, because you are currently operating on my land without a valid lease, I am invoking the immediate penalty clause. Rent is retroactively due, and the new lease agreement for all 3 hubs will be set at $15 million a month. Payable immediately." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Gregory Donovan stood up, his face purple with rage. "Preston, you told us the assets were unencumbered. If this loan goes through, we're all liable for fraud." "The Denver deal is dead," another board member shouted. "We don't even have operational grounds for our trucks." Preston was hyperventilating, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled. He looked at Sylvia for support, but the widow was already inching her chair away from him, her eyes calculating her own survival. "You can't do this, Noah," Preston stammered, the arrogance entirely stripped from his voice. $15 million a month. It will bankrupt the company in weeks. You'll destroy Dad's legacy." "Dad destroyed his own legacy when he forgot where he came from," Noah replied coldly. "But I'm not going to let the company die. I have a counter-offer." The room fell silent again. "I will sign a new, reasonable 99-year lease right here, right now, stabilizing the company's assets," Noah said. "In exchange, Preston, you will transfer 100% of your controlling shares to me. Effective immediately, you will step down as CEO, and you will vacate the premises." "You're stealing my company," Preston shrieked. "I'm buying it," Noah corrected. "With the land you desperately need. Sign it over, Preston, or I lock the gates of the Chicago, Dallas, and New Jersey hubs at 5 p.m. today. Gallagher Freight will cease to exist by Monday." Preston looked around the room. The board members were glaring at him with pure hatred. He had cornered them into a fraudulent deal, and Noah was their only salvation. Even Sylvia looked away, refusing to meet his eye. Preston was completely, utterly isolated, defeated his hands, shaking violently. Preston reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his expensive pen, and signed the transfer documents. Mitchell Harrison slid in front of him. Noah picked up the papers, ensuring the ink was dry. He looked down at the man who had gleefully thrown him into the freezing rain just 24 hours ago. Security. Noah said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. Mr. Gallagher is no longer an employee of this company. Escort him off the property. As the guard stepped forward to grab Preston by the arms, Noah reached under the conference table. He pulled up the old oil-stained olive-green canvas duffel bag and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, dusty thud. Oh, and Preston. Noah said, his eyes hard and unyielding. You can take the bag, to remind you of the dirt you came from. What did you think of Noah's incredible calculated comeback against his greedy family? Sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't shiny and new. They are hidden in the humble roots we often overlook. If you loved this story of satisfying revenge and hidden wealth, please smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below on what you would have done in Noah's shoes.